Hey there, Ben here with Oddly Armed, and today I'm coming at you with another review and tier listing video, this time of the Bushmaster ACR. Really cool rifle that's got a lot of pop culture behind it and a bit of interesting and sordid history. So let's go ahead, get into the history on it, and then talk about how I have mine set up. So there is actually a surprising amount to talk about when it comes to the history of the ACR, particularly since this isn't a military rifle. It was never adopted by a standing military, so it's only really seen civilian and some small numbers of military testing sales. But that being said, the civilian history on this rifle is pretty sordid and it's changed hands a couple of times over the years. So the history of the ACR starts around 2006-2007 when Magpul, the company that we all know and love that makes magazines like this one, came out with the design for the Magpul Masada. Now that was kind of a conglomeration of a couple of different ideas that were already on the market. One being the AR-180, so that's got a bunch of different design features that were incorporated into this. And then a little bit more on the controversial side, it pulls from the Robinson Armament XCR as well for some of the ergonomics. So the name Masada comes from the Siege of Masada, which was part of the, and really one of the last events of the First Jewish-Roman War back between 72 and 73 CE. Now, I'm not a historian, so I'm not going to get any deeper into that, but that's where that name comes from. ACR stands for Adaptive Combat Rifle, and adaptive is a pretty good name for this rifle, and we're going to get into that a little bit later on, particularly when it comes to the modularity. So Magpul had the design for the Masada, which was really good and actually got a ton of industry interest from a bunch of different companies and from the public at large. So the issue was Magpul doesn't manufacture firearms. They make all sorts of accessories, parts, magazines, all that fun stuff, but they don't make guns themselves. So they had to partner up with somebody in the industry, and that was Bushmaster, as well as Remington. So Bushmaster really took on the civilian sales for the ACR, while Remington took on the defense contracts and potential military sales. Now, around 2008, when Bushmaster had really gotten the design from Magpul, and they started digging into a little bit, they made a good amount of modifications to the design. And originally at SHOT Show back in 2008, they were saying hopefully they'll be on the market by like 2009. And they kept getting delays due to some modifications they were making to the design and getting tooled up and all that kind of thing. So the original Bushmaster ACR did not make it to the US market till around 2010. So it was a couple years after they initially announced it. And that's where the drama with the ACR really started. At SHOT Show in like 2009 and 2010 when they were talking about the ACR and coming to the civilian market. The big thing that they, or at least one of the big things they talked about, was going to be the price of the ACR. They were saying it's going to be fairly inexpensive, around $1,500. Now in 2010, when it finally hit in the market, that turned out to be basically a massive lie. The rifle, when they were in stores, they were going for around $2,600 to over $3,000 in some cases. So needless to say, the civilian consumer market did not react well to that, and a lot of people were pretty angry about what they saw as Bushmaster, I guess, literally lying to them about what the price of this rifle was going to be. Now, in their defense, that's something that still happens nowadays. It's something that we see quite frequently. One thing that comes to mind for me personally is the EOTech OGL. Again, a very large company that has a pretty large footprint. And they first announced a product at like $1,300. Then the next announcement says, well, it's going to be $2,000. And then finally, it ends up at over $3,000. And in the case of the OGL, we're still waiting for it. But this is not a good sign for a rifle generally when we see giant jumps in price like that. Now, what didn't help the case at the time was in October of 2010, so after the rifle had only been on the market a couple of months, they had a recall on them, and that was primarily due to some issues with like the bolt carrier group, where you had the potential to touch off more than one round at a time when you fire it. So you basically accidentally go full auto, which sounds really cool until it happens, and it's not super exciting. I've had it happen with an FAL before, and that was freaking terrifying. But anyway, so at that point, they were dealing with issues with being too expensive as well as a recall. One other issue that also cropped up, and part of the reason that the public was so not really enamored with the rifle that they thought they were going to absolutely love, was the promise of having caliber conversion kits with the ACR. And that's one of the big ticket items on this, is it was designed to be an extremely modular platform where you can swap out almost everything on the rifle to include the barrels. But it took years for Bushmaster to finally release barrels to the market. And the initial ones they came out with were just different forms of 5.56 barrels. So like mine here is the 10.5-ish inch version of the barrel. And they also came out with a 16 and an 18 inch, but that's not really what people wanted. People wanted different calibers. And it took until like 2017, 2018 for those kits to finally become available. So a full 6-7 years after this was released is when they finally got around to it. And those calibers were 300 Blackout, 6.8 SPC, I believe, as well as 450 Bushmaster. Now, getting into the actual production on the ACR, they were built in a couple of different places over the years. The original Bushmaster version of it, or at least from the original Bushmaster, was built in Windham, Maine. And those were made for a couple of years until Bushmaster was acquired by Freedom Group. Now, if anyone lived through gun culture in the 2010s, they will absolutely remember Freedom Group. That company killed a couple of different really popular gun makers. For instance, Bushmaster, and then you also have Remington. AAC was owned by them, a couple of different other ones, Marlin as well. What Freedom Group really did is they ran all of those companies into the dirt with horrible management. Some of the issues that they ran into pretty much across the board is QC issues. With Remington specifically, they were acquired in 2007, and you're still told not to buy a Remington 700 that's post 2007 when they are acquired by Freedom Group. So that actually led to some issues with the ACR as well after they were acquired by them. Now, eventually, the actual manufacturers in Windham would split off of Bushmaster, and they became their own company, Windham Weaponry. And they moved, or at least Bushmaster, owned by Freedom Group, moved the production of the ACR to Ilion, New York for a short time period. And then there were also receivers made in Lawrenceville, Georgia, which is where mine was made. Now, up until the ACRs were discontinued in around 2019, they were made in Huntsville, Alabama, and that's where the final production really started happening. Now, around 2018 is when there was kind of a revival in Bushmaster for the ACR. So for a couple of years, they really kind of ignored it. They didn't come out with any kits for it or do anything with it, come out with new models. And they really came back to the design and started introducing the caliber exchange kits. They also updated the barrel profile, which was one of the really big complaints on the early ACRs. And they also came out with a pistol variant as well as new handguards, which were either M-LOK or key mod. So they actually started investing back into the design once again. Unfortunately, that interest and investment in the ACR didn't end up paying off, and Freedom Group went under in 2020. And at that point, all of their different conglomerated companies that they had acquired over the years were sold off to different people in the market. So like PSA bought some components of them. Brownells also got in on it. There were Franklin Armory is the one who actually potentially bought the rights to the ACR, except that, I don't know, there's some drama there too that I can't really fully understand where this design fully lies anymore. Now, even though Franklin Armory potentially got the rights to the ACR, they never, or at least up till this point, haven't released or re-released it to the market. For whatever reason, there's some drama back and forth between what is now Bushmaster Reborn, post-Freedom Group, as well as Franklin Armory, who potentially owns the rights to the ACR. They keep butting heads on who actually has access to the rights to the ACR and who has the ability to bring it back to the market, because both companies have been interested in reintroducing the ACR. Now, while the drama between those two companies was kind of happening, there is an additional company called Templar Precision run by Dana Beck, and he came out with essentially a clone of the ACR, or at least as of this moment, he's still working on it, and it's called the Scythe. And we're going to get into it more when we talk about aftermarket parts with Templar Precision, but they've been one of the reasons that this rifle has still had a following today, because you can still get parts for them, surprisingly, even though it's been discontinued for almost 5 years now. And that really brings us up to date with where the ACR is. Now, as of this moment, SHOT Show 2025 is next week, so I'm fully expecting to see 10 different models of the ACR pop up throughout the show. I know Templar Precision is going to have one, so I'm interested in seeing if Franklin Armory or Bushmaster bring anything to the show, but we'll see about that in about a week. And while we're still here, let's go ahead and get a quick look in depth at my personal setup on the ACR. Alright, so starting at the front, I have a chemo muzzle device on my personal ACR because I do run this suppressed quite often. And then moving back from there, you can kind of see in the front, you'll get a better look in the disassembly video, but that is going to be our gas plug, and we have a suppressed and unsuppressed setting. Right now you can see the U, so it's unsuppressed. But moving back from there, I have Slate Black Industries grip and rail covers on my personal model. And then I also have a Midwest Industries, M-Lock handguard on here, and these are no longer made. Really good, really nice handguards though. You can see the slot on the right side there for the charging handle, which can be swapped from side to side. And moving back, you see multi-cal on the bolt because these were supposed to be multi-caliber, even though it took them a couple of years to make that happen. And then checking out the optic that I've been using on my personal ACR, we have a Trijicon TA31 ACOG. So this is a standard 4-power. I've had this thing for years, and it is starting to show a little bit of age just from a ton of use all over the years. Moving down from there, we can see on the right side, we have the safety selector, which is a 90-degree selector, as well as our magazine release in the same spot as on an AR-15. And my favorite feature on the ACR, the bolt catch and bolt release, which is right in front of the trigger guard. Now moving back, we have our grip, which is actually still made by Magpul. So you can see right there, we have our Magpul symbol on there. There is a storage compartment in it at the bottom that takes standard Magpul storage grip accessories. And then moving up from there, we just have our serial number. I'm running some Magpul MBUS backup sights on here, and then we have the all-famous ACR stock, which is still very popular to this day. And let's just get a look at the other side here. So again, there's my backup sight, the charging handle here on the left side, so we can get a good look at that. It's very well placed. I actually really enjoy this charging handle. And then I didn't mention on the other side, but we do have a QD sling swivel, on the left and the right side at the back of the handguard. And then on the left side, we also have that ambi mag release and the bolt hold open bolt release there, as well as the safety. And then we have the button to fold the stock. And again, this stock is one of the most popular parts of the ACR and is still well beloved today on other platforms. And to kick off our ratings, let's go ahead and start out with accuracy, where I'm going to go ahead and give the ACR a score of 4. That's because at 100 yards with 55 grain GGG Lithuanian M193 ammunition, I was able to get a group of 2.465-ish inches. So that's going to be right at the end of what's considered a 4. So not terrible accuracy, but also not the best accuracy I've seen so far. In the second category we're going to get into is the aftermarket support for the ACR. Now, as I mentioned before, the ACR has been discontinued since 2019-2020, so a lot of the companies that were making parts for the ACR at the time are no longer making them. For instance, Midwest Industries used to make handguards, so mine's one of those. Great handguards, but since then they've been discontinued because there's no new ACRs on the market. Magpul also used to make not only this stock, but also an aftermarket stock. Like they made a precision stock for this, as well as a fixed stock, which came on the basic model of the ACR. But those are no longer in production, as is this stock, which again, just folds to the side here, is no longer in production. And these have been going on rifles other than the ACR for a long time now, which is where most of the production for the stock has been going. So nowadays, there's really one company that's keeping the ACR together, and that's Templar Precision, run by Dana Beck. Now, Templar Precision makes all sorts of parts for the ACR, and like I said before, he's working on the Scythe, which is essentially an ACR clone, just the phoenix rising from the ashes of what was the ACR. But over the years, he has been doing different parts for these to include handguards. One of the really cool things that he's done is lower receivers for the ACR, and what's particularly cool about that is he makes, first of all, aluminum receivers that take AR-15 grips and fire control groups, so that's pretty cool if you want to have aftermarket parts, as well as an AK magazine compatible ACR lower receivers. And talking about that, he also makes charging handles as well as barrels. So for barrels, he makes 5.56, 300 blackout, as well as 7.62 by 39, which that comes in with the AK magazine. So there's a fair amount of parts. I can't tell you how available they are at any given time. I know he's a small shop, so production numbers are going to be pretty limited compared to a large company. But he is doing some interesting things with this rifle, and he also makes replacement parts for it. So we'll get into that later on in maintenance, but that is a good thing to know with this rifle. And next up we have durability, where I'm going to give the ACR a score of 4. So it's actually pretty well made. All things considered, I know I said there were some QC issues over the years. The one point I'm going to be dropping off here for mine in particular, I had one of the receiver screws. So you can kind of see right here in the receiver, there's a screw which holds in steel rails on the inside of the extruded aluminum receiver that the bolt carrier group rides on. I had one of those screws back out and fall out of the rifle when I was at the range. Couldn't recover it, but that was back in 2019 when Bushmaster was still in business and they sent me a replacement part for it, or a replacement screw. But that's something to be aware of, is people have had QC issues just because Bushmaster was part of Freedom Group and they didn't have the best attention to detail. That being said, the design was really well done, and it's actually overbuilt to a pretty solid degree. So there's a lot of steel built into the receiver on those rails. The extruded aluminum receiver has held up very well. The finish is actually very nice. And I haven't really had any issues with any of the polymer components, mainly because they're made by Magpul, which is one of the best in the polymer game. So overall, I think a score of 4 for durability is fair. Next up, we have Ergonomics, where I'm going to give the ACR a perfect score of 5. And this is actually one of my favorite rifles in terms of ergonomics overall. So starting from the front, just looking at some of the controls, we have that gas plug up there. So there's a single button on the side of the gas plug that you press in and you twist, and then you're in your suppress setting. Moving back from there, we have our charging handle here on the left side, and that it's a non-reciprocating charging handle that locks to the front here. And as you can see, it is downswept. However, you can remove it using this little thing right here. You pull that back and the charging handle will pop out. You can either change it so it's upswept instead of downswept, and then you can also change it over to the right side if you'd like. Now, moving back to the receiver section, first of all, our fire selector is going to be AR style, and it is also going to be ambidextrous on both sides of the rifle, as is our magazine release and the bolt carrier release. So that is going to be a 90-degree safety selector, but it is very nice and tactile. This one is polymer. The earlier Wyndham guns will actually be color matched to the rifle and look a little bit differently. So being a later rifle, mine has the black safety selector on there. Then moving forward, we have our magazine release, which is in the same place it is on an AR-15. And then my personal favorite feature of the ACR is going to be our bolt carrier release, or our bolt release. And if we lock back the bolt and come back there, you'll see that popped up a little bit. So to drop the bolt, all you have to do is press down and it'll send our bolt home. So very good design. It's ambidextrous, and if you want to lock back the bolt without a magazine, it is incredibly easy to do with just your trigger finger. And then moving back, we'll just take a quick look at the stock. So this is adjustable for length of pull with a button on either side of it. We have a QD sling swivel at the back, and then we also have a cheek riser, which you pull back and it'll pop, pull up, press forward, and it will give you a little bit higher cheek riser on there. And then it also folds to the side. So with this button here, you just press it, and then our stock will fold around to the right side, and it's just held there with tension. So no locking mechanism. All you need to do to lock it back out is pull, and it'll lock back in place. And that basically covers all the ergonomics for the ACR. Next up, we're going to have maintenance, where I'm going to give the ACR a score of 4. Now, when it comes to cleaning and disassembling the ACR, it is incredibly easy to do, and there's a lot of room in the receiver for you to get in there and clean parts off. You can pull the entire barrel very easily due to the quick change barrel mechanism that's built into it. So you can clean inside the receiver where the barrel goes in, as well as the barrel very easily. Your piston assembly comes out very easily and is easy to clean. So there really isn't any places that I can ding it for maintenance as far as cleaning and disassembly. I am going to drop it a point though due to the lack of availability on OEM parts, since Bushmaster no longer exists in its original form that could build the ACR. So there are not OEM replacement parts on the market at all. Now, what really saves it is Templar Precision and still making certain parts for this rifle, to include bolts. But again, availability might not be the greatest on that. You might be waiting a little bit to get those parts. You can get certain other parts such as your receiver screws or pretty much stuff like that, some simple parts on like Midwest Gunworks from stock left over from before Bushmaster closed down. But yeah, availability on OEM replacement parts is not going to be as good as it is on rifles that are still currently in production. And the next category is going to be modularity, where I'm going to give the ACR a perfect score of 5. That's because modularity was really the name of the game. The A is for adaptive, and for the most part, it really lives up to that. So some stuff that you can swap out are stocks. Now, you're not going to be seeing a lot of options for different stocks anymore. But you do have the precision stock that Magpul made, as well as the original fixed stock, and this absolutely amazing folding stock option. You can swap out the lowers from Templar Precision, and again, they make aluminum lowers where you can swap in different grip modules for it, so your standard AR-15 grips. And then the triggers for the ACR are actually, for the most part, compatible with the AR-15, so you can swap in whatever AR-15 trigger you want. Although Geisley also made an ACR-specific trigger, but I believe their other SSA and SSAE triggers will still work in the ACR if you want that option. Handguards you can also swap out, but again, the biggest issue is going to be a lack of different options on the market. Pretty much at this point you have Templar Precision, and that's really going to be it, other than your OEM polymer handguard or the original tri-rail handguard from the enhanced one. And then barrels is going to be really the big deal here, where you're going to have Templar Precision, and they have the 5.56 300 blackout, 7.62 by 39. There's still the old Bushmaster 450 Bushmaster barrels, as well as 300 blackout, but those can be pretty difficult to find nowadays. You might have to go to one of the Bushmaster ACR Facebook groups to find some of those parts. They also made charging handles where they had a handle on both sides of the rifle, but those are another part that's basically unobtainium nowadays. Now, as far as magazine compatibility goes, I've not really had any issues with particularly Magpul magazines. I've used T-Mags in this, I've used Lancer magazines, so your general standard Stanag magazines work fine in the ACR. One thing I would caution you against is if you like to monopod off of the magazine, you can have malfunctions with the ACR, or at least I've had malfunctions. So that's one thing that I would keep in mind there. Now, one place the ACR is going to lose out quite a bit is price, where I'm going to give it a score of 2. That's because, again, it's a discontinued rifle, so the price has been going up and up on these because they were a very popular rifle, and they still are, and they still have quite a bit of gravitas to them. So you're going to be seeing these for around $2,400 to $3,000 sometimes on Gunbroker. So they're still very expensive, and then certain replacement parts or aftermarket components that are no longer made are going to be very expensive and difficult to find. Now, getting into shooting characteristics, I'm again going to give the ACR a 5, and this is one of the better shooters that I've really had over the years. I've had this rifle for about 7, almost 8 years now, and it has been absolutely fantastic. As far as the trigger goes, mine clocks in at 7 pounds, 8 ounces on average, which sounds heavy, but I actually generally prefer a heavier trigger on rifles at least. It's still very smooth. It's a mil-spec style trigger, but I really have no problems with it whatsoever. And again, you can swap it out for a Geissele if you would really like to. As far as recoil and pulse goes, it is a very smooth shooter, and some of that is going to come down to weight, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's also gassed very well, very nicely gassed, and that'll actually get us into suppressor usage as well. So I've used this with both full back pressure cans, so my Saker 762, which on the suppress setting works incredibly well. This is easily in my top 5 favorite suppressor hosts on the market at any given time. Then I've also used this with my B&T SRBS 762, which is a low back pressure can. It doesn't cycle on the suppress setting. You have to have it in the normal setting for it to work, which gives you a little bit of gas back, but it still works incredibly nice, and it is a very, very good shooter overall. In terms of reliability, I'm gonna go ahead and give the ACR a 5. And that's because every single time I've had even a minor malfunction with this, it's been because of user error. So it's either been because I've been monoputting on the magazine. It's up to whoever's listening to this to decide if that's an actual malfunction. In my thinking, it's more of a user error kind of issue than it is on the part of the gun. But there's also, if I try to shoot it in suppressor setting without a can on it, of course it's going to short stroke. So that's really going to be on me again in terms of normal usage on the correct gas setting and making sure that I'm not doing anything crazy with the magazine. It works 100%. And now we're going to get into weight, where I'm going to give the ACR a score of 2. And weight has been one of the biggest detractors for the ACR since its inception back in 2010. That's because this thing is a chonky rifle. So even in its SBR configuration without any of the extra parts on it, it's coming in at 8 pounds because this rifle is really overbuilt. There's some components on here that add weight, like the barrel change mechanism adds a couple of ounces. And again, going back to Templar Precision, they actually make a new trunnion for this, which is fixed and actually cuts down the weight a little bit because you no longer have the barrel change option. But there's also steel components in the receiver, so it is going to be fairly heavy. And again, the first generation, or at least the early generations of the ACR, also had a heavy profile barrel, which no one knows why Bushmaster decided to go that route versus having like a middle or medium profile barrel or a pencil weight barrel. But for whatever reason, they decided to go with an extremely heavy barrel profile. Towards the end of production, around 2017, 2018, they lightened the profile of the factory barrel, which was a great change and cut off a couple of ounces, but it is still a heavy rifle. And when we go ahead and add up all 10 of our categories, we come out with a score of 38 for the ACR, which puts it pretty solidly in the A tier. And I really do think it deserves that. It combines a lot of really cool features. And again, some of the biggest problems with it are going to be the fact that it's no longer in production, so that's going to kind of detract from some of the aftermarket, but it still makes up for it with the ergonomics, and then also the modularity of the platform and how much actual thought they put into it, as well as the really, really nice shooting characteristics, puts it solidly in the A tier. And the final thing we're going to talk about today is going to be where I think the Bushmaster ACR rates in the coolness factor. And I'm going to throw it straight up in S tier. And this is one of the most beautiful rifles in my opinion. The lines of it are absolutely gorgeous. It is just a really cool looking gun. And some of its pop culture history really reflects that. It pops up every once in a while in movies since it looks pretty futuristic and cool. Like one of the recent Planet of the Apes movies, it was in there. And just every once in a while it'll pop up in different movies. But where you really see these is in video games. The most classic example being Modern Warfare 2 for Call of Duty. The ACR in there, I mean, I wish mine had a freaking heartbeat sensor on it. It doesn't, because that doesn't actually exist. But anyways, that was where this really got popular in pop culture. And then since then, it's been in multiple different Call of Duty games all the way up till today, as well as in the Battlefield series, they've been popping up as well. So they have a lot of following in pop culture, and then just given how dang freaking cool it looks, I'm gonna throw it in the S tier. Alright guys, and that's gonna do it for my review and the tier listing on the Bushmaster ACR. So thank you for tuning in, for checking out the video, and my channel's only been up for a couple of weeks, And I've already gotten a fair number of views, so I want to thank everyone for that, for the support and helping me grow it and hopefully turn this into something later on down the line. So again, I appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe, do all the fun stuff. That's going to help me continue to grow it. And please come back. I'm going to be having more videos coming out in the near future. Still have a ton of stuff down the line that I'm going to be doing this tier listing review on, as well as hopefully some more first looks and disassembly videos. So stay tuned and check out what I got coming on later on down the line.